Hello everyone! Welcome back to my channel. Today I'll be talking to you about Raksha Bandhan, one of the most famous festivals in India. Listen on to hear the story of Raksha Bandhan. The book that I will be reading the story from is from Wilco Picture Library. Raksha Bandhan. Rain was pelting down on Chittalawedi. Normally, the children would have been grumbling and sighing, waiting for it to stop so that they could go out and play. But today, they were not even aware that the street outside had become a little rivulet. They were gathered together at Chaitanya's house to meet Pishima, his aunt, who had arrived from Kolkata. She had made shingaras, a delicious spicy snack that had them licking their fingers. When she emerged with a bowl of rasogalas, Ranga was really overwhelmed. Pishima Didi, you can tie a rakhi to my wrist tomorrow and I will protect you forever, he declared, and Pishima cuddled him in delight. But she lives in Kolkata, so what can you do from here? Geeta asked. Oh, once you tie a rakhi, our brother does what it takes to protect his sister, Pishima replied. Do you children know the story of Rani Karnavati? When they shook their heads, she beckoned them all closer and began to tell them the story. Long ago, in the 16th century in fact, the state of Rajasthan, as we know it today, was full of many Rajput kingdoms. The Rajputs were brave warriors and they fought many wars to defend their territories. Now, a little to their south, in Gujarat, Bahadur Shah was becoming a very powerful king. He had just defeated Muhammad Khilji of Malwa and was now eyeing Chittor, the kingdom of the Sisodias. He attacked them in 1535 and Vikramjit, the Rana of Chittor, was defeated in the battle. His queen, Rani Karnavati, realized that Bahadur Shah's army was powerful and they would not be able to defend Chittor on their own. She summoned one of her messengers and handed him a beautiful rakhi. Take this to the Mughal emperor, Humayun, and tell him it is from his sister, Rani Karnavati, who is in great distress. Tell him I seek his assistance in defending Chittor from Bahadur Shah. Now hurry, there is no time to be lost. I know about Humayun, said Deepu. He was the second Mughal, the son of Babur. That's right, said Pishima. Humayun was in Bengal at that time and the message took a long time to reach him. As you know, there were no phones, no trains, no cars in those days. No way of getting messages across except by messengers or horseback. When Humayun received the rakhi, he was overwhelmed by Rani Karnavati's message. That a Hindu queen could look upon a Muslim king as a brother was something unheard of in those days. He immediately set off for Chittor. Did he fight a war to protect Rani Karnavati? Venkatesha asked. Well, unfortunately, it took Humayun a lot of time to reach Chittor. When he arrived, he found that the women of Chittor had committed jahuar, a practice amongst the Rajputs where women preferred to kill themselves rather than submit to the enemy. But he had taken the Rani's message to his heart and he attacked Bahadur Shah nevertheless and defeated him. So he's kept his word to his sister even after she was no more. Why did they commit jahuar? Couldn't they just fight Bahadur Shah and protect themselves somehow till Humayun arrived? Asked Mohini. My little one, in those days women were not trained to fight. Besides, even gods need help in the face of a powerful enemy, even the king of heaven, Indra. Really? Tell us about him, Pishima, urged Pittu. Well, in the olden times, the rakhi had a much wider meaning than it has now. It was a sacred thread that could be infused with special powers by chanting certain mantras as religious syllables or poems in Sanskrit as called. They were also sanctified by using rice, durva grass and other sacred items. The Rakhi was tied on the wrist for many reasons. It could protect you from the enemy and from diseases. It could also protect you from engaging in sinful behavior. Even now, after a special puja, the priests tie a red and yellow thread called moli for the same reason. In the case of Indra, it was his wife who tied a Rakhi on his wrist. He had fought a long war with Vrita Indra and was unable to overpower him. As he stood there, disappointed and depressed, his wife Sachi chanted powerful mantras over a sacred thread and tied it to his wrist. Energized by the powers, Indra went back into battle and vanquished his enemy. Are there any more stories about Raksha Bandhan, Chaitanya asked. Oh yes, there are more. Like the one about Bali. Bali? I know about Bali. He is the king who returns to Kerala once a year for Onam, announced Mohini. That's absolutely right, my precious one, Pishima said. Now, as you know from the story of Onam, Bali was defeated and sent into Pathal, the netherworld, by Lord Vishnu, who appeared in the form of a dwarf Brahmin. But Bali remained true and faithful to Lord Vishnu even after his defeat. Moved by his devotion, Vishnu decided to protect Bali's kingdom himself. And so, he left his own kingdom of Vaikunth and came down to earth. So she disguised herself as a Brahmin lady and sought refuge in Bali's home in Patal. Bali observed that after her arrival, there were bounteous harvests and great prosperity all around them. As you all know, Goddess Lakshmi is the goddess of wealth, and it was but natural that there should be prosperity all around her. But Bali was unaware of her real identity. Then, on Shravana Purnima, the full moon night in month of Shravana of the Hindu calendar, she tied a Rakhi on his wrist. Bali now demanded to know who she really was. She revealed herself and told him how lonely she was in Vaikunth without her husband. Bali was overwhelmed by the Lord's kindness and her simplicity. He insisted that the Lord return to his abode and sent them off with many gifts. It was getting rather late now, but the children were in no mood to go home. They begged Pishima for some more stories. She looked at their eager faces and could not refuse them. All right, but this is absolutely the last one, she announced. Hooray, they cheered and waited eagerly for her to start. This is a story about Lord Krishna and Draupadi. One day, Lord Krishna was injured and blood was pouring out of his wrist. Draupadi, the wife of the Pandavas, instantly tore a piece of her sari and tied it around his wrist. Krishna was deeply moved by her action, and he regarded that shred of cloth as the most beautiful Rakhi he had ever received. From that day on, he swore he would protect Draupadi all her life. I know about that time he protected Draupadi, cried Venkatesha. My mother has told me the stories from the Mahabharata. The Kauravas invited Yudhishthira to a gambling match in which they cheated and won. Yudhishthira lost everything, their palace, their money, everything. Finally, he even lost Draupadi to them. The Kauravas then began insulting and humiliating Draupadi in the court, and despite having 5 husbands, she called upon Lord Krishna for help. How clever you are, Bhishma remarked admiringly. Now tell me, how are we going to celebrate tomorrow? Geeta ties a Rakhi on my wrist every year, said Deepu, and I'm going to protect her from that Ranga all my life. Ha! I will ask Mohini to chant mantras and tie a Rakhi on my wrist, and I will defeat you and send you straight into Patal, was Ranga's spirited reply. Deepu jumped up, and Bhishma had to intervene quickly to stop the fight. I know what we can do. Let us all get together here and have a great Raksha Bandhan celebration. If you come in the morning, we can make some Rakhis together and use them for the function in the evening. Make Rakhis? But how? Chaitanya demanded. I will show you tomorrow. If you can find anything interesting you would like to put on your Rakhi, please bring it along. Things like beads, rudraksha, pieces of sponge, and most important of all, bring blue glue. We are going to need plenty. It was an excited bunch of children that went home that evening, splashing through the puddles that the rain had created by the roadside. They were back the next morning, clutching little packets of odds and ends with which to make rakis. Pishima had bought long skeins of red and gold thread. She cut some lengths for each other and showed them how to tie a looped knot in the center. Then the loop was carefully cut and the loose ends brushed smartly with an old toothbrush. Then she examined what the children had bought and selected a little star and some beads. She used this glue to stick them on and the Rakhi was ready. "That is the best Rakhi I have ever seen," declared Venkatesha. "Pishama Didi, will you tie it on my wrist for me this evening?" "Of course," she replied, tussling his hair. Ranga sprang to his feet and declared that Pishima was going to tie a Rakhi only to his wrist, and if anyone else wanted one, they would have to defeat him first. "She is my Pishima, so she will tie it on my wrist, not yours or anyone else's," insisted Chaitanya. "That is not fair," cried Pittu, and a great babble broke out. Pishima shouted above the din and said that anyone who wanted lunch would have to have their Rakhi ready well in time. That got them busy again, and by lunchtime there was a whole assortment of Rakhis neatly arranged in rows on a tray. Some were shiny with sequins and little mirrors, some had stickers of cartoon characters, and there was even one with a bright yellow marble in the center. Pishima admired their handiwork, and after lunch they added finishing touches to their creations as they waited for their parents to arrive. By 4 p.m., everyone had assembled for the Raksha Bandhan ceremony. Chaitanya's mother had arranged an oil lamp, some betel nuts, and a small heap of rice grains and some kukumum on a silver salver for the aarti. The boys stood solemnly in a single file, and Pittu's mother performed the aarti for each boy by waving the silver salver 3 times around his face, applying kumkum on his forehead, and sprinkling some grains of rice on his head. Pishima led the girls in tying the Rakhis on their wrists. "Now all of you are supposed to protect us," declared Mohini. The boys beamed back at her, their hearts filling up with pride. "The next time that ghost from the people tree even breathes in your direction, you just call out to me," Chaitanya told her. The parents cheered loudly on him. Mai, Ranga's mother, had made some coconut barfi for all of them. "Today is also celebrated as Narali Purnima in Maharashtra," she explained. "The fisher folk usually stop fishing in the monsoon. On this day, they offer coconuts to Varuna, the god of the seas, and seek his blessings before they commence the fishing activity again." Venkatesha's mother told them that in Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, and Kerala, this day was also celebrated as Avina Avidam. On this day, Brahmins change their sacred thread and begin study of the Vedas, the ancient scriptures. Geeta's mother remarked that this day seems to be very special all over the country. In Gujarat, along with the Raksha Bandhan celebration, we also perform Pavitra Pona, which is a grand puja of Lord Shiva. The elders continued to chat, sipping tea together. Meanwhile, the children were busy scripting a play called Legends of Raksha Bandhan to be performed by the children's theatre group of Chitalavedi. Pishima watched them from the window and smiled softly to herself. Well, that's the story of Raksha Bandhan. I hope you enjoyed it. Did you? Well, I did. And I hope to see you next time for the next festival. See you then.